Around 6 years ago, I used to work for a company called InSparks, and they had two brands, one called B2 and another one C-Date. And back in the time, I had a task to optimize the conversion of the landing pages. And what I did, I actually created a Drupal module or plugin which is supposed to optimize its conversion. It was just the A/B testing plugin, and it were testing the conversions according to different landing pages. Basically, I was changing the couples and checking which of them perform better for specific regions or countries. And that's the reason why they have this current couple here, or maybe in the Spanish target market they have this couple. I don't know. It was so. Shortly after, I started to be interested in Chrome extensions, and I start to experiment with Chrome API. As soon as there's introduced like Internationalization API, I start to translate my extensions into different languages. This is one I speak, and into additional languages with the help of my friends. Around 4.5 years ago, I joined a company called IO, which is a company behind a popular ad blocking extension plugin, which is called AdBlock Plus. And so I was responsible for the website for IO. I used to be a website module owner, and currently I'm mostly working on AdBlock Plus UI to give you the grasp of understanding how it's related to the topic. Basically, the multi-language websites for iOS are roughly translated into around 20 languages, and AdBlock Plus itself is translated to 80 languages, 80. And considering huge user base, considering that we are shipping to more than 100 million devices, and we're trying to be take in translations, take translations. That's a very important topic for us. Localization. There are different definition and understanding of the localization. I tend to follow the one that is also described into W3C website, which is the localization is an adaptation of the project to the cultural, linguistic, and other needs for the targeted market or country where you're launching your application or targeting. I think this meme provides very good understanding what is localization. And basically, dates can become quite confusing, if you may. I noticed that when I was traveling back in the US, and I was kind of confused with the shift of month and day order. And basically, for current date, it's really hard to tell whether it's stands for the 12th of November 2018 or 11th of December 2018, right? Yeah, I'll use JavaScript examples here, but I'll walk through all of them, as I don't know how many developers we have here, or how many JavaScript developers we have here, and I'll walk through all the steps. So basically, this is localization code using the JavaScript for different locales. What I'm doing here, I'm creating a new date object, passing the year and month. Basically, when you're passing the month, it's starting from 0, so 10 basically stands for November. And yeah, 12 is a day. So I'm using Internationalization API and using date format method, passing the locally, and formatting actual date. And basically, result for this code is current one. So basically, this is what result, localized result for Great Britain is. And this one is for English US. I was making this presentation 1 month ago in Lithuania. So it was interesting to notice that they are using year, month, day format. Here I have also a link to the different date format according to the countries. I'll share my slides with you, so you can feel free to dig into more deeper into it. And this is a format for Armenian. Unfortunately, I had to hard code it here because currently there is a bug in the Chrome. And basically, Armenian is in the Chrome being outputted into the current format, which I find myself a bit confusing. It's different in Firefox. You will, if you run this code, you will notice that you will have this result in Firefox. But I guess a bug will be fixed soon. So even if you will try to localize for Armenian market, just take that into the consideration. Same applies to the decimal separators. And if you are working with money, providing some service to the user where they can do online orders and stuff, I think it's a good idea to be careful when it's real careful when it comes to money. And basically, this is a similar example of how the decimal separator and numbers are formatted in different countries or localities in this case. Order is something that you might want to be careful with or just note it. Basically, considering this order, and as I already mentioned, I was doing the current presentation in Lithuania a month ago. I did notice there an interesting specificity in their language. Basically, in their alphabet, the Y, which stands for Ibis or Ibis, I'm not sure how to pronounce it correctly. So Y in their alphabet comes before letter N. So basically, if you're localize your application and try to sort the array of strings. Here I'm using the example, as you can see, and I'm using local compare and passing into the array sort method. I'm specifying local compare for the Lithuanian, and basically the result will be this one. So if you'll sort current array of strings, you will have a different order for different languages. So that's something that you might want to take into the consideration. Accessibility. So yeah, so a lang attribute declares language of element or the document. If you use a lang attribute on the HTML element, it will basically tell the browser agent that the content of a specific element is of the specific language. And if you will define it on the HTML element, you will basically declare the language of actual page content. In this case, it's German. And D stands for the German locale. And
can I put multiple languages there, or will it break a lot of things?
Multiple languages in HTML? I don't think so. You might want to separate it with elements. So if you have some element which is not translated, you can specify language for that element. But I'm not aware of that practice that people are using multiple languages on HTML element itself. Okay. hreflang. So I did not quite often and quite common when you're creating, for example, a website and you're not being able to translate all the pages when you're shipping your problem. Sometimes you may end up with links, for example, that leading to the untranslated version of the website or leading to the a part of the page that have a different language. And in that case, where the hreflang attribute come to play, it basically tells the language of the target document, and in this case, it's says there is German for documentation and English for this link. I'm also, in addition, using a simple CSS trick in order to visually present the target language. So I'm using it on my own project, and I think it's a very useful tip for very simple CSS rule. So you can use it. As I mentioned, I'll share the slides. So you can just.
Besides that trick, what are the applications? I mean, why? Let's say I'm a developer. Why should I bother to put the hreflang on some link?
To provide information to the user agents. So you never know who is visiting your website, what kind of technologies they are using. If that information is relevant for the screen readers, some of them might use it, some of them might not. So it basically tells the language.
But right now, is it known? Like, is any major, I don't know, Chrome or some mobile something using this?
I'm using it
You're using it on a site that you're controlling, but is some reader who's reading arbitrary pages leveraging this and taking advantage of this information?
I do know that MacBooks screen reader do not using it. I can't say for all of them, but yeah.
Is it new?
No, it's not new. I don't think that it's new. So I can't tell for which screen readers using it, but I'm using it to provide more information to the user agents, how different screen readers using that information. So in addition, I have to use similar trick to visually provide that information to the users that using regular browser and no assistive technology, for example. And whenever your browser requests some resource from the server, it also sends some header, and within that header, it also sends the accept language header, which basically specifies the user preference of the language. So in current example, basically, the request says to the server, like, I would like to get English version back if it's available. Q basically stands for the weight. So higher the Q, higher the like the preference of that person for specific language. If it's not available, I would like to get in the Russian, and if it's not available, I would like to get it in Armenian. And I have a screenshot from the Chrome browser, but this is also available in all other major browsers. So people can specify their preferences in the specific order, and so they will tell the server what language they would like to get back. And even though I do have a current setup in my browser, I still keep seeing this while living in Germany, because I'm getting basically most of the time German ads. While I do not completely speak German, it's not really relevant for me. And so I think it's worth to note that whenever you're creating some application, you might also want to make a use of that header, or browser use geolocation targeting, the way this current example works. But it's again up to you. But I think in most of the cases, it makes more sense to use to provide user information according to its preferences rather than geolocation. But it's a case-to-case situation, I think. And yeah, there are also attributes. There are people tend to forget to translate, well, mostly because. Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh.
Alternative text.
Alternative text and a title is something that I did notice quite often are being forgotten, and it's mostly because it's not visible at first glance when the page is rendered. It's just a heads up that it's a very good idea to translate them, beside of just providing alternative text for the a broken image, let's say, but again to support different assistive technologies. And it's also worth to note that it's actually quite obvious that not all the languages work the same, and there are differences. One thing that it's quite often you might have noticed that there are also languages that not only being read from left to right, but also to the right to left. And dear attribute basically provide information about the direction of the language. So it's again similar to the language lang attribute. You can use it on the elements or on the HTML element, defining the actual direction of the document or element. I was working on the current new AdBlock options page, and I was just imagining how the page would look like if I wouldn't take the information into the consideration. So if I would localize direction wrongly, people would have this kind of feeling. I think it's not really good experience, because if your language is if you're reading from left to right usually, and a shift in the layout may also be not intuitive for you. So yeah, that's something I'm trying to take into the consideration also when I'm designing the layouts. And here I have a couple of examples, some common layout issues that you may notice. Not the layout issues, but some practices that I would like to share with you. I'll say so. Basically, here I have some header with menu items and a hamburger menu right here. And as you can see, the hamburger menu is positioned absolutely according to its closest relative ancestor. And basically, this code says just position it absolutely and have a gap from top to right of the 10 pixel. And if I would get, for example, the requirement to translate this layout into Arabic, let's say, I will end up with something like this. So as you can note here, the right to left direction and the lang attributes. And yeah, basically what people usually do in this case, they are creating some exception for the right to left direction. And in general, it would be great if you would avoid the overwriting, because it's adding also maintenance effort on top of it. The reason is because whenever you'll change this other positioning property, you might need to change this one as well accordingly. So if there is some techniques that will help you avoid it, depending on the layout, it's better to use it. For example, you could use a flex box and specify the flex grow on the menu items, which will basically say, in this case, please push the content till the end. So you don't need to maintain different values of the directions. And also one thing I noticed it's quite common. when people designing developers designing fixed width layouts, and they may notice as soon as they will get some requirements, let's say, to translate their layout, they might end up with something like this, because it's yeah. For example, the different languages like the can have like different lengths of the words, and it also makes sense to consider that case. And if in this case, it might be because the person wanted to have some paddings, and that's why the width was specified on the bottom to have some paddings. Maybe you would like to use the padding instead of fixed width, right? And similar case with the previous layout, it may apply if you will have, for example, margin left, which is specifying some gap in this case between actual text and button. So if you will get again the requirement to translate to the, let's say, into the Hebrew, you would end up with something like this. And you might notice to have another trick to position it properly. You might want to use a margin inline or padding inline for whatever layouting you're doing and what you're trying to position. But the thing is, if you'll use like margin inline, I'll suggest you to use it with precautious because it's yet experiment technology, and you might end up using a lot of vendor prefixes with it. Or you might want to have, like, again, the similar trick like from the previous slides, where you're just overwriting the property depending on the direction of the language. Yeah, but it's better to find the solutions that you minimize the effort of the maintenance afterwards, I guess. Fonts, it's also something that you might want to take into the consideration. And basically, it's always a good idea to always choose the fonts that are supported by the target languages. You might want to consider fallbacks and make use of the Unicode ranges. So imagine the situation, you're getting the requirements that you need to use, let's say, for example, South Pro, and use all the available subsets from the Google fonts. So here I'm just selecting different font size, like font weights. It's light, regular, and bold, and also selecting all the subset of the languages. This will lead into something like this. You will have a bigger font file, even though you might not always use the whole character range. If you're using like TTF font, you're stuck with old browsers. The font size will be bigger than 1 megabyte. In order to avoid that, it's a good idea to use the Unicode ranges and split it into the chunks. And basically, here's the code of specifying the Unicode range. What it does on the font face CSS property, it basically says that for current Unicode ranges, for current font, use current local file, or you can specify any other file here. And I do understand that splitting fonts into the different chunks might be a tedious task. Well, basically it is. You can do it without any tool. So what I'm using, I'm basically using a Python font tool library, which make it quite simple, I think, to split the font into the chunk with a basic command. So in this case, I'm extracting déjà vu sans. Do you know what the Unicode range stands for? This Unicode range? So yeah, basically this Unicode range stands for Armenian letters. And basically with this example, I'm extracting the Armenian subsets from the déjà vu fonts. Oops, sorry. And yeah, here we go. And there is another, yeah, I'm also sometimes using Google Fonts API, and you can use, for example, a simple request. In this case, I'm just specifying like a source sans pro, as a font family, specifying the weights and all the subsets. In the end, you will have this file, which you can just copy paste into your application or extract actual fonts from here and host by yourself, hopefully respecting all the licenses behind of it. SEO, yeah. So yeah, it's also important to consider to provide the users also relevant search results. So here I have just an example of a translated attribute and meta description. So this way you can provide user better searching experience using different search engines. Yeah. Rel alternate reflang is does provide information to the search engine crawlers, bots, about alternative languages that your content is available in. So in this case, imagining if I would have this link rel attributes here, and I'm being on, for example, German version of the page. This says basically this page is also available in English and Spanish. And it's also quite often when you're ending up with a duplicate content when you're starting to translate your application or website. And in order to avoid that and not let that duplication have an impact on the search engine ranking and provide more relevant information for the users who are searching the content, it's also a good idea to make use of the canonical. Canonical basically says, I do have a duplicate of this content, but please index the page which is specified in href attribute. SMM, SMO. I use this abbreviation for social media marketing and social media optimization. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have here only Open Graph example, but I do note that I also need to add other formats like schema. So here is an example of localization of the page for social media as well. So in this case, I'm using different OG image. If you imagine that there have some other version of this page in different languages. Yeah, I'm using different image here. Again, translated title and description. So this something will be visible, for example, if you will share the content in Facebook. Because they are using Open Graph, and I think they are also defining it. OG local specifies the language of the content, and OG local alternate provide also information of the alternative version of the same page in different languages.
But sorry, so how can I actually provide both of those for? Let's say I have it for Spanish too. I mean, what is this content in the local alternate? What is it telling them? Like where can they find the Spanish version? Or
it tells information to the social media. How the specific social media using that information, it's up to them.
It's not saying here where the Spanish version is or something.
It depends. Again, it depends on the social media. It's a meta information that is defined in the Open Graph standard. How it is used by the specific social media, it's up to them.
The question is whether is there a tag, for example, which we would use to indicate where the let's say Spanish version of the same page is located, like
yeah. Pardon me. Yeah, now I got the question.
Some of the meta content, it's a link.
It's already in the shared information. If you're sharing the URL link, yeah, I got what you mean.
So kind of you provide here saying, hey, for French version,
yeah,
get this resource.
I'm not aware of any tags that provide that kind of information. Yes, I agree that it might not make a lot of sense.
This schema seems limited. Like I'm reading,
Yeah.
let's say I'm reading the Armenian version, I share, and Facebook
Okay.
could show maybe to each user.
I assume this might be used by the Facebook applications.
Or maybe by the translation tool which they provide.
Yeah.
The translation tool usually auto-detect the language,
Yeah.
but it depends.
That's a good question. I agree, and I don't know how it is being.
I mean, we have this problem, right? Like we share something, but
Yeah.
then, okay, if a translation of the article exists, you know, toch, who can read this version, they get shown that version,
Yeah,
and the
right.
other people get shown the other version, and they never know that the other one exists.
I can say there is no indications that whenever I'm using these attributes and I'm sharing in the Facebook do not using it in any way. Well, in the regular page, if I'm using regular page and I'm sharing it.
I mean, well, we don't quite know what other users.
Yeah. I was want to say that there is no actual visual indications that it's being used, but if it will be used with the application, yeah. But that's a very good note, so it will make sense to also find out what it's actually being used for. According to the Open Graph, I think it is used by the applications, but I've never created Facebook application for myself, to be honest. So I have no idea
It's
how.
not just well, I use the Open Graph. Like when I get
Okay.
a page, I'm using it. But
I guess you can make a Chrome extension which gets this information and checks if this version of article is available, like manipulating the URL of the article.
but it's a guessing game, right?
Yeah.
Like substituting in.
Yeah, right.
Like if there is a EN in URL, you can switch it to RU and check if Russian version is available.
Yeah, so basically the only thing is specified is that it's using, I think, yeah, it's using ISO 3166, which stands for the language, yeah, and region.
Variant.
Um,
Okay, Manvel,
Wait.
you're going to go make them change this, right?
Maybe. So now, yep, internationalization. If you translate your application into the multiple languages, you might also notice that most of the framework or tools that you're using, they will also make use of the current file format, which is JSON, XML, or POT, or some other format, depending on the tools you are using. So what these files are basically specifying, they are specifying the string ID, description, which is not actually being visible by the end user, but it's basically provides the content to the translators. So you may tell information to the translator where the specific string are located, or have a link into the screenshot, for example. And actual message text, which is being visible to the end user. Here is an example of the JSON file, where you can see there's a string ID specified, description, and actual message. And if you would have like the alternative version of, for example, for other languages, in this case for the Russian, you would have same information specified here beside of message, which is the localized version of actual message. And in order to use that translation strings, what you need to do is basically reference translation file and reference the string ID. So here is an example method that basically says that please get current string from the current file. And I'm using some kind of similar syntactical sugar. I like using it, which again is basically says use current string ID from current file. And if I'll put this, and I would like also to use this kind of notation in my layout, for example. People might do it with, for example, I don't know, handlebar helpers or some other templating engines, and create some helper method for them. And this would translate into the, for example, the English version if a person visiting the website in page in English, or for Russian locally, or for Armenian, maybe. And if you're using strings, you might also might end up with a case where you will also use links inside of the strings, not links, but also different tags. And what is worth to mention is that the word order might be different, and you might also consider to shift them around depending on the language. In this example, I'm using quite a known expression, which is I love you, and people probably know it in the different languages. And basically, here I have two links, which one on the word love and one on you. So basically, in the 42% of the languages, this expression is used in this order, which is subject, verb, object. In this case, it says all of you, but in the 45% of the cases, the order is shifted, and it's SOV, sense, subject, object, verb. And in this case, it says I, you, love. I think it's similar in Armenian. Yes, kes sirumem. But in the case of Armenia, I think it's also, you can do it other way around. Yes, sirumem kes, right? Yeah, something like that. And yeah, there is a 9% of VSO and also VOS, OVS. And so basically what you want to do to also create some kind of order of the tags, and in order to provide better flexibility for translators to shift the tag orders if they need. This is a Je t'aime, which is French version, I love you. Et amo, and yeah, the Armenian version. You might also want to prevent the translation of some fixed terms. It can be regular fixed terms, some brand names, usernames, and this is a way how Chrome extension do it. They're specifying some ID message. I'm sorry, I need to rush because I'm not being able to fit into the time. And so it's a placeholder, and basically people here specifies a number in the pass array, which element to use, string to use, and example for translators. So basically, in this example, this would be translated into something like this. I again tend to use like similar syntactical sugar when I just specifying the ID, and yeah, imagining it's a source string with a fixed tags, I can shift them. This has one disadvantage that you cannot specify the name of the fixed tag, but for my use case, it's enough for me. But yeah, that's something you might also want to take into the consideration. So in this case, I'm just using some fixed text, and I'm not translating this string out that fixed terms. And this is a common structure of the ITN projects, and so you might want to have also some locales file where you will hold all your locales. Let's say the about will provide held all the string information about the about page, header for some layouting, and yeah, you might want to have some theme folder where you will create your layouts and hopefully be able to use in your layout in templating engine actual information from these locales. And also some page where you, for example, would like to write your content. It can be some markdown, and hopefully it again will use this information. So around 8 months ago, or even more, I wanted to create a simple website for myself. And I have a couple of requirements. I wanted to create a static website so I can easily host it in the GitHub pages. or some other places. I wanted to have a templating engine, front matter, preprocessors, and actual internationalization. So I took a look at back in the time to the most popular static content generators, which is a Jekyll. And as you can see, Jekyll do not have I18N support out of the box. You can do it with additional plugins or modules. Hexo, which is also a quite popular project, and I'm highlighting Markdown yellow. I'll come back to that part in a little bit. So yeah, there also have Hugo and Hexo had some I18N implementation, but it wasn't quite what I wanted back in that time. They all are great products. I'm pretty sure it's also might be possible to integrate the desired result, including additional plugins, modules, or developing on top of their API. So the requirements they didn't met was current one. So basically, they were how I interpret their documentation, and the all information I could find in their documentation is that in order to create a translated page, you would end up creating a separate translation page. So imagine in this case there's like about page, and you're creating about French version, which hold like the French version of that page. The problem with this one, with this approach, is that if you will update a string in the source file, you will not be able to keep. It will be really challenging to keep the other translation file in synchronization, because basically you need to find out which string was changed, in which paragraph, or in which sentence. So what I wanted to do, I want to write a Markdown. I continue Markdown because I'm using it quite a lot. I'm mostly using Common Mark. So yeah. So as I mentioned, it's quite simple. That basically what you need is the string ID, description for translation, and actual message. So I wanted to have something like this. So to add that information into the Markdown, we are doing also something similar at IO, where we are using translation strings inside of the Markdown files. And yeah, even though we are doing in the way that it's very good for our use case, but for my use case, I wanted to have a different approach. For example, I want to use same syntax and notation everywhere in my layouts in my Markdown file. And also I wanted some translation, TMS integration. TMS stands for Translation Management Tools. There are a couple of them you might heard about, for example, Google Translate, where you're just uploading your files, translation files, and providing a way for the translator to translate it. Yeah, Crowdin I'm using a lot. We're currently also using Crowdin. I'm using it because I kind of like its user-friendly design for translators and its API. Pontoon is the one that is used by Mozilla. What I find interesting about it is that it provides in-context translation. So you basically can translate inside of your page. I'm not sure how well it works with the metadata, but it's something that I also want to dig into. So yeah.
I should mention, the Google one, of course I used to work for them, but it's horrible.
Okay.
As you saw, right? Like, they haven't updated it since 2005 from the UI.
Okay.
Like, so I have to admit that right now the Microsoft one is looking a little bit better from a practical standpoint. Like, you wouldn't want to invest too much, I think, in building on the Google one.
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting feedback. I didn't use it a lot for myself, but I also know that it's a popular one.
The reason is that it can you can use the approach of letting it automatically translate most of the content and then only doing a little bit. That's nice.
Yeah, I think nowadays, most of them have some kind of integration with a translation tool or machine learning.
Will Pontoon, for example, or one of those other ones, will it?
Well, the crowding which I'm using is using suggestions, like suggestion for translations. It also have translation memory. I will also show the interface shortly. And yeah, if you're interested. So basically, what I did, I put everything together, my requirements, and I have a proof of concept of how it works. It's called Siemens. If you are interested in to see that actual proof of concept, in my understanding of the internationalization project, you might want to have a look. And so basically, I've all the examples I've used there. You can also find most of them here. And basically, the markdown part I was talking about also is something you can see it here. As you can see, how I'm writing the actual content. And coming back to the topic of the TMS, I've also integration here with the crowding, so you can see also what I meant by the separate strings. So in the end, you will have separate strings, and whenever any of those is being changed on the source project, translator will be notified and know which exact string has been changed or which of the strings is new. You can have a look if you are interested in. And basically, one thing worth to note, I also have my slides here hosted in Siemens.io. If you would like to get the slides, just go there. And I also have them translated into Armenian. But I'm quite sure that I got a lot of technical terms wrongly. So if you would like to help me to translate it Armenian, and I may try to do it Armenian afterwards, so you can help me here. There is a button. You can just click on Armenian and suggest a translation. I can try to adapt and do it. I have a table of content here. If you would like to get specific code from my slides or specific examples, so you can use it. Yes, where was my presentation? Actual one? Nope. Yep. So I have a couple of resources here. This is links to the different platforms, tools, how they are doing their localization and translation. You might want to have a look into them. Some libraries, frameworks, if you would like to integrate your solution with them. For example, I found the IIT Next interesting one because it also comes with a TMS integration. So you might want to have a look into it. IIT Node, the Polyglot is the one that is used by Airbnb. Some resources if you're using some frameworks, maybe Vue, Angular, React, Rails. You might want to check them out. This is my contacts. If you have questions to me, if you have I really would like to hear your story about your localization, how you're doing it, what kind of issues you have with your products. I'll be really happy to talk with you regarding that. If you have a note about the approach I'm using, or you might want to consider to check out the approach I'm doing, I will suggest you not to do it in the production because it's currently in the beta version and under extensive development. I plan to make a stable release in the end of this year, but I'll really value if you can give me a feedback regarding that, if after you have a look into it, suggestion, or just you can just fork and play around with yourself, create something else. Yeah. Thanks for attention. I'm sorry that there was some question I couldn't provide answer right away. I'm really be interested into looking into that topic. For example, with how Open Graph alternative languages can be used by the social medias. But yeah, I'll be happy to try to answer any other questions you have.
For Jekyll, what do you recommend? Let's say I don't want to leave Jekyll.
Sorry?
Let's say I don't want to leave Jekyll for GitHub pages. What would you recommend for IIT now?
So as I can go back to the slide. So okay, so let's see. Yep. So basically what is a static content generator, right? So you can host your all of these examples are static content generators, and you basically can use them to host your content in the website. If you ask me, I would recommend my tool. But no, I'm just kidding. Basically, yeah, I would recommend only for the requirements I had here. Your requirements probably might be different. And you might want to experiment and implement different IIT solution from maybe the resources I provide. I, for example, really like Hexo because it's node-based. I'm extensively developing in the node, so I want to have some CMS in the environment that I'm familiar with in order if I need to create the pull requests. GoHugo is...
but is it like for a site that's built with Node, or are you saying the tool itself is in Node?
Tool itself is in Node.
But it's working with, let's say, just a GitHub Pages repo that's totally static, hand-built.
Right. You're just generating the static content in the end. Yeah.
So you tell it, basically, you point it to that repo from your command line, and it will generate the new page.
Okay, I can't say how well they are integrating it with the GitHub pages. I do know that you can generate static content. You might want to use some additional tool to make the integration easier. But yeah, if you are interested in it,
okay, I can look at it.
yeah. It's Hexo.io as far as I remember. Yeah, it's quite a popular project. The Go, I think the person who created GoHugo, he's also working in Google, as far as I know. But yeah, integration with GitHub page, I didn't integrate the Hex or Hugo with the GitHub page. I used Jekyll, so I can't say how well they are doing same job, but I can assume they are pretty good. Any other question? Okay, if there is no other question, yeah, I'll be, as I mentioned, I will be happy to hear your story about. Oh, do you have a question? Sure.
There's not. I had a question which was given to me, but I wanted to ask you this question because I didn't know the answer. Is it typical, going back to something in your slides, I didn't want to interrupt then, is it typical for people to use different font sizes for different languages?
Different font sizes for different languages? Are you,
Right, so you had the font family slide.
okay.
And I guess so. Let's say some people say that the Armenian fonts are too small, and so you would actually, in your CSS, use a different font size for Armenian or for Arabic or something like that.
It actually depends on the font you are using. Some fonts have these different sizes.
Yeah, I didn't have that kind of issue. I didn't get that kind of feedback that it need to be adjusted, but I know that it can add additional overhead into the adjust the maintenance effort for different fonts. It's an interesting question. But I would like to know how common is it.
Actually, font defines a lot of meta things like this, like padding, line height, and stuff like that. And on Android, it's not used by default, but you can enable it. So, for example, I use a different AM Armenian font, and the default font in Android has proper line height, and when I use big font sizes, it's showing properly. But when I use this Aryan font, lines are very close to each other, and it's like messed up.
No, I see.
Raising more problems.
Yeah. I'll be happy to have a link into it. We can have a look together into it. I don't have answer from top of my head right now.
Sorry, we'll talk more. No,
A question, so how do you provide information to translators? Like you need to give them screenshots, you need to give them description of strings, so what they're doing. Best case scenario, like a live demo where they can play, like any suggestions on that side?
In the live demo I've showed, I'm not adding screenshots. So basically, here you can see this information to the translator. It says it's a paragraph in the specific section. That's currently enough for me. In general, I don't know, crowding has a functionality when you can upload screenshots. So basically here you can add a screenshot, but there's an API that you can also automate it. Or I can add, for example, link here to actual screenshot in the description.
What about like non-web sites? Like let's say you're working on native app or mobile app or something. How do you make the ties, etc.?
I'm not sure how much the difference is. It depends on the platform, probably.
It was more like the question was more related to like workflow. Like let's say developer adds a new feature. How developer and translator communicate.
Okay. So yeah, most of the cases through the CMS, where they can file some issue saying, yeah, I would like to have this additional information in the description, and I think the different CMS provides that ability. I do know the crowding is providing that ability, where people can file random issues. For example, if they don't see the supported language, they can contact you asking, for example, yeah, I would like to have this language added so I can start to translate. So ideally, I think it would make sense to consider a TMS which provide that kind of in communication interface between developers and translators, or translation managers and translators, basically. Oh, okay, sorry. Thanks for coming, and yeah.